Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here with you tonight. I was told that as the moderator, I could channel my inner Oprah Winfrey. However, I don't have keys for cars for you under your seats. But we have something better for you. What we have is a panel that is going to celebrate 7 decades of ties and experiences to farm and wilderness. So I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists who are sitting among you. I'd like to introduce you to Suzanne Davis Emery, representing the 40s to the 50s at Farm and Wilderness. Next up is Baird Brown, representing the 60s. I'd like to introduce you to Linda Randall, a current board member, representing the 70s, with a shorter afro. Up next is Colin Mitchell, representing the 80s. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Morgan Jones, representing the 90s to 2000. So we have 2 questions that we've asked the panelists to think about and share experiences around. Share an experience, a memorable experience of your time at F&W. Camps.
I don't think that anyone is here from the 40s, am I right? So anything I say, you can't check. Yeah, I'm making it up really good. I was 8 years old when I found myself on the camp train coming from Washington to Baltimore to Philadelphia, New York. And the next thing I knew, I was in White River Junction, and a bus, I think was a bus, picked us up and took us to this camp. I don't remember saying, yes, I'd go. I just found myself going. And it was for 2 months. The camps then were just for 2 months. You didn't have a choice. And I was just 8. And I think the thing that hit me was I needed to grow up. I needed to be independent. I needed to get along on my own. And I didn't have my parents there or my 3 older brothers to tell me what to do. When we got there, Cram Cottage was our main lodge. The waterfront was in front of Cram Cottage, all the way at the end of the lake. And there were just 3 cabins, Shining Waters, Little Cricket, and Beaver Lodge. The Birches, I think, was used for the overflow counselors that didn't have a cabin. So there were just 18 girls. I must have loved it, because I came back for the next 5 summers until I was 12 years old. The things I remember about the camp were the idea that you can do it. Anything is possible with cooperation, a willing spirit, and just get in there and do it. One of my favorite things that we did was the square dancing. And we went to the local Grange halls and square danced with the local folks. And we climbed in the back of the farm truck and went. When I think about it now, with all the car seats that you have to have in the vans, we were just loose. There was a farm truck, there was the Marmon touring car, that was Ken Webb's favorite thing, and if you won cabin inspection, you got to go to Plymouth to get ice cream as your prize. And you must remember, at this point, Route 100 was still a dirt road. It was primitive, but it really appealed to me. I just had a wonderful time, and then coming back as a counselor, all of a sudden I realized that I had 6 girls that I was responsible for, and I was only 16. They took counselors very young then. I was 16 and 17 as a counselor. And it was an awesome experience. I think Peter stole my thunder. The one thing I was most proud of was swimming from one end of the lake to the other and back again. So those are my memories.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Hi, I was a counselor at TL in 1965. I came to the camp through the Webbs, who I met while I was at Dartmouth College and knew them through Hanover Meeting. Okay. And I led a number of trips as a counselor over Mount Lincoln and the Franconia Notch and the Rangeley Lakes. But my memory I wanted to share is of taking the youngest kids at TL, who I think were probably 9, 10, 11, on a trip that was an experiment of sorts, in which we packed up our packs and hiked out of camp and went south down Route 100, which was still a dirt road. And still, you know, you passed the occasional pickup truck, but there wasn't too much traffic to worry about. And down through Plymouth and southeast through the Calvin Coolidge State Forest to Plymouth Center. And Plymouth Center at that point was a wooded crossroads with a bunch of cellar holes. We had pictures in the camp office then of 30 or 40 houses in a clearing over with a bridge over the creek, and none of that was there. It was an exciting place to discover. And from there we went north through the next day through the Calvin Coolidge State Forest up to back near to Route 100 A, and camped in what I guess was a little quarry. It had it was open on one side and a bank about 12 or 15 feet high on the back side, and it was all grown up with sapling birches. And you could step to the edge and grab a birch tree and swing down like the Robert Frost poem. Closest I've ever come to living out Robert Frost's instructions. And the third night we were meant to go to the side of Bald Mountain. If you think about the triangle that's made by Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, and Plymouth, Bald Mountain is in the upper right part of that triangle. And we were meant to go up on the side of the mountain where, according to the map where this trip had been charted out, there was a spring, and indeed the map showed a little stream coming down. Well, we hiked and we got to where there was meant to be a spring, and we mushed around, and we were in a farm field. It wasn't like you could have hidden the spring if there was a spring there, and there was nothing. And it was getting to mid-afternoon, late afternoon, and we sort of looked at each other and we said, well, how much water is in our canteens? And fortunately we had filled them all full about an hour earlier when there was an opportunity. We decided nobody was going to die of dehydration or that we couldn't make dinner. And we said, well, might as well spend the night on top of the mountain, not here. So for those of you who are in the music, who are music fans, this was our night on Bald Mountain, but it was a rather gentler one than Mussorgsky had in mind. And we went up, and lo and behold, the mountain is partly bald. There's a granite top, and there was a pool about 10 feet across, not maybe more than a foot deep, just rain catchment. Mostly just granite, a little bit of moss around the edge, a little bit of cedar water look. First time in my life and last that I ever used the water purification tablets that we always carried with us just in case. And we not only had the water in our canteens, we had enough water to make Kool-Aid and to cook our dinner and actually wash up. And then, the top of the mountain where it wasn't granite was moss and lovely dried grass, and it's the softest place I've probably ever camped on that I can think of. And we woke up the next morning on one of those gorgeous soft Vermont mornings with the grass about a little higher than your head where you were sleeping, and the sun streaming in, and it just was magical. And the next day we broke camp. We headed up the ridge toward camp, but eventually ended up coming down toward Route 4 and just hiking back into camp, having made a full circle. And that serendipity was just one of those magical moments.
There's the afro. Beautiful.
Okay, so I'm Linda Randall, and first I just want to say that I got to Farm and Wilderness via Earlham, which really means via Jack Bailey, because my first year at Earlham, I'm from Connecticut, and my first year at Earlham, it was May, and Jack came and said, "Hey, do you have a summer job?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you do now." And I said, "Oh, well, where am I going?" He says, "Vermont." And I said, "Oh, okay, different day, different time." He packed up Big Green, put 5 of us, George Oberst, myself, and several other Earlhamites in the Big Green. We had no idea really where we were going. We drove off to Vermont, and there I was. And so that is more or less how I got there. And one summer, while I was a counselor at IB, for some reason, I decided to read this book, Cheyenne Autumn by Mari Sandoz, to my cabin. I don't remember why, but I did. Every single night, I read some of this book. And one of the quotes from this book is, it's an old Cheyenne saying, that a coal once kindled is easiest set to glowing. And that reminds me of my favorite go-to story from camp. And that's when I was in charge of a trip that was an 8-day trip. And it was divided into half, where half the trip started out canoeing and ended up hiking. And the other half, my half, we started out hiking and ended up canoeing, of course, meeting in the middle at day 4. So that happened, and my group got in the canoes, and we canoed on down south to where we were supposed to be picked up. And we got there. We're all ready. Nobody came. Okay. Well, at that point, we said, it's starting to rain, that's okay. We turned the canoes over, we were well prepared, we rationed out our food, we sang a little, we went to bed, we got up in the morning, nobody came. The rain stopped, we went out, we did a few little excursions, staying within sight of the area, and we went to bed that night, and we said, So the next day, we got out our maps, we looked at our maps, and the counselors, of course, we went over and we talked to each other. Do you think we could have made a mistake? Is it possible that we could not read our maps and we're at the wrong site? No. That couldn't possibly be true. So in our best wilderness-trained way, we said, we're staying right where we are so that we will be easy to find. Okay, afternoon comes, and down the wooded trail comes this Farm and Wilderness van with the canoe trailer attached, and out jumps Gil de Benedetti. And he says, "Hey!" And we said, "Hey? Is that it?" Well, that story has kind of become, well, sort of my take on it, and for 30 years, more or less, I've told that story. And my part of the story is that camp forgot us. We were gone. We weren't on the pickup schedule as we should have been, but we were resilient. We weren't worried. Camp said, I wonder where those campers and counselors are. Weren't they supposed to be back here? And then they thought, wait a minute, maybe we were supposed to pick them up. And then they came and they got us. My version of the story is funny, it's dramatic, and it positions us sort of like the Farm and Wilderness version of the USS Indianapolis without the sharks. It turns out, as maybe I learned recently, maybe not, that we arrived early, that we weren't lost, we weren't forgotten, but we were merely strong and able canoeists, stroking down the lake in record time, and we forgot about time, as we did a lot on these camping trips, and we got there ahead of schedule, and we weren't forgotten. The other end of the trip was picked up on time, so how could they have forgotten us? Well, the answer was, they didn't. But you know, really, which version is true? And does it matter? Well, I'm sure if you're in this room and you're a parent, it matters. But if you're a camping organization with 800 children under your care each summer, which story do you want told as the years go by? What becomes history? What becomes remolded with each telling? And what becomes the legend of the trip? That ember that's tended carefully until it's needed to bloom into a warming flame. I'm sure each person on this trip remembers it differently. I've heard from campers personally and via Facebook on the trip that they remember it a little bit differently than I do, but they remember the broad strokes. They remember that we learned to sing, "Take me out to the ball game," a beat behind the measure. Take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, try, point. Anyway, and they remember that we were in high spirits. They remember that it rained, and they remembered that we weren't picked up for 24 hours or more, and they remembered that we had a great, great time.
Thank you, Linda.